Now that we've established that the Big Bang is complete and utter nonsense, and our dating methods are also full of crap, let's take a look at the absurdity of biological evolution. This is a typical description of biological evolution you might see, charts and things of like this, made out of a blob or in the image of God. Darwin and the standard model of evolution, right? How many of you have heard that we share 98% of our genome with chimpanzees? Have you guys heard that before, taught in school? You know, that's one of the reasons they say we evolved from apes, because we supposedly share 98% of our genome with chimps. Okay, the clip I'm about to show you is not from a creationist. It's from an evolutionary-minded group of people describing how they got those numbers. Check it out.
When researchers sat down to compare the chimp and human genomes, those single-letter differences were easy to tally, but the big mismatch sections weren't. For example, if a genetic paragraph, thousands of letters long, appears twice in a human scroll, but only once in its chimp counterpart, should that second human copy count as thousands of changes, or just one? And what about identical paragraphs that appear in both genomes, but in different places, or in reverse order, or broken up into pieces? Rather than monkey around with these difficult questions, the researchers simply excluded all the large mismatch sections, a whopping 1.3 billion letters in all, and performed a letter-by-letter comparison on the remaining 2.4 billion, which turned out to be 98.77% identical. So, yes, we share 99% of our DNA with chimps if we ignore 18% of their genome and 25% of ours.
Yeah, that makes sense. What? That wouldn't make sense in any other context. Nobody would buy that, right? Wow, okay. And this is why more and more scientists, even secular scientists, are starting to steer away from the standard Darwinian model. It's so full of holes and assumptions. In fact, when Francis Crick and James Watson discovered DNA, they immediately knew this could not have evolved by random chance mutation. So what is their solution? Aliens! Aliens must have done it, right? The late Nobel Prize winner, Professor Francis Crick, along with British chemist Leslie Oriel, proposed the theory of directed panspermia in 1973. A co-discoverer of the double helical structure of DNA molecule, Crick found it impossible that the complexity of DNA could have evolved naturally. So good thing Giorgio wasn't around back then, right? Panspermia, I don't know, therefore aliens. The idea of panspermia was born. The idea of ancient aliens must have seeded our world, kick-started evolution. And this is now becoming the new standard. Thus, when asked if intelligent design was a plausible solution to the evolution of man, this is what Professor Richard Dawkins had to say.
It sounds very laudable to teach the controversy, to teach both theories, but there aren't two theories. There's only one theory around. There's only one game in town as far as serious science is concerned. Of course, you get negative reactions from creationists, but who cares about creationists? They don't know anything.
We're Johnny-come-latelys. We live in the cosmic boondocks. We emerged from microbes and muck. Apes are our cousins.
You don't believe that the Earth is round only if you're an astronaut. You don't believe Napoleon existed only if you're a historian. You believe these things because they're facts proved by evidence. Evolution is also a demonstrated fact. The truth really is out there. It's not a matter of opinion.
You have written that God is a psychotic delinquent invented by mad, deluded people.
No, I didn't say quite that. I said something rather better than that.
Oh, well, please tell us what you said. Please tell us what you said.
Well, I would have to read it from the book.
No, please.
The God of the Old Testament is arguably the most unpleasant character in all fiction. Jealous and proud of it, a petty, unjust, unforgiving control freak, a vindictive, bloodthirsty ethnic cleanser, a misogynistic, homophobic, racist, infanticidal, genocidal, filicidal, pestilential, megalomaniacal, sadomasochistic, capriciously malevolent bully.
So that's what you think of God?
Yeah.
So you believe it's liberating to tell people that there is no God?
I think a lot of people, when they give up God, feel a great sense of release and freedom.
Well, then who did create the heavens and the earth?
Why do you use the word who? You see, you immediately beg the question by using the word who.
Well, then how did it get created?
Well, by a very slow process.
Well, how did it start?
Nobody knows how it started. We know the kind of event that it must have been. We know the sort of event that must have happened for the origin of life.
And what was that?
It was the origin of the first self-replicating molecule.
Right, how did that happen?
I told you we don't know.
So you have no idea how it started?
No. Nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else.
Evolution is a fact. It's documented by science.
Right, how did that happen?
I told you we don't know. Believe these things because they're facts proved by evidence.
So you have no idea how it started?
No. Nor has anybody.
Nor has anyone else. What do you think is the possibility that intelligent design might turn out to be the answer to some issues in genetics or in evolution?
It could come about in the following way. It could be that at some earlier time, somewhere in the universe, a civilization evolved by probably some kind of Darwinian means to a very, very high level of technology and designed a form of life that they seeded onto perhaps this planet. Now, that is a possibility and an intriguing possibility. And I suppose it's possible that you might find evidence for that if you look at the details of biochemistry, molecular biology. You might find a signature of some sort of designer.
Wait a second. Richard Dawkins thought intelligent design might be a legitimate pursuit?
And that designer could well be a higher intelligence from elsewhere in the universe. Well, but that higher intelligence would itself have had to have come about by some explicable or ultimately explicable process. It couldn't have just jumped into existence spontaneously. That's the point.
So Professor Dawkins was not against intelligent design, just certain types of designers, such as God.
Many people are extremely illogical.
I'm skeptical of the claim.
I'm skeptical.
I'm skeptical.
Yes, skeptical.
Skeptical.
Skeptical of claims
for the ability of random mutations
and natural selection
to account for the complexity of life.
Careful examination
of the evidence
for Darwinian theory
should be encouraged.
So we have a crisis in cosmology and apparently a crisis in biology going on at the same time. You know, if biological evolution here requires the intervention of intelligence, who created those other beings? You see, all they're doing is pushing the problem further out. You know, eventually you got to get to a first cause. And ideally, you really got to get to how does a first self-replicating cell manifest itself out of non-living material, right? I mean, you got to get, you can't just go to chimps. You got to go further back than that, right? Well, I mean, they're forced to go on faith. Ooh, that's that crazy religious word, right? Because they have no evidence for what they're talking about. And yet, over and over and over again, we're seeing stuff like this, aren't we? Article after article talking about other Earth-like planets out there. You know, there could be 1 billion Earths in our galaxy alone, 40 billion, 8.8 billion. Oh, and incidentally, they're finding all these Earths by looking through telescopes millions of light years away, or even thousands of light years away. Both are absurd. You know how far a light year is? Yeah, it's nearly 6 trillion miles. They're telling us they're spotting black holes 55 million light years away. If they got telescopes that powerful, turn the telescope on the moon. I want to count the rivets on the buggy. Or shut up. You're full of crap. There's no way you're looking that far out there, but they're always pumping it in your head. There's other Earths-like out there because they have to. They have to prop up their theory, you know, that there are ancient aliens out there. Over and over and over again. Well, this next video shows how life forming from non-living matter is simply impossible, whether we're talking about here on Earth or elsewhere in the cosmos.
What is faith? It is belief in the absence of evidence. Now, I don't propose to tell anybody what to believe, but for me, believing when there's no compelling evidence is a mistake. The idea is to withhold belief until there is compelling evidence.
When I talk to the public about astronomy and this question of life elsewhere in the universe, the most commonly held viewpoint I encounter is, surely it's impossible that we could be alone in the universe. After all, how could it be amongst this unimaginable number of opportunities for life to get going? It only happened once, only here. And this is a viewpoint held by many scientists and talking heads in popular media too.
Do you think that there is life outside of Earth, intelligent life in the universe?
Absolutely, there is life elsewhere, and almost certainly intelligent life. It has to be. The odds are just overwhelming. There's 200 billion stars in this galaxy. Well, now it looks like every star has about 10 planets, so there's almost certainly intelligent life.
I assume it's the most frequently asked question, are we alone?
My best guess is that the universe is teeming with life.
There's surely other civilizations out there in the universe. There are 350 billion galaxies out there in the universe.
But an argument based solely on statistical grounds comes with a fatal flaw. And that is that it is perfectly plausible that the probability of life starting from scratch, which we call abiogenesis, is a number which is so small that it greatly outweighs the number of opportunities, the number of worlds out there in the universe for life to get going. For example, if the probability of life beginning is 1 in septillion, say, then the case for a crowded universe evaporates. What is the probability of abiogenesis? At a basic level, we certainly know that no lab experiment here on Earth has ever succeeded in creating what we would call life from chemical broths with conditions similar to that of the early Earth. This was first famously attempted by Stanley Miller and Harold Urey in 1952 at the University of Chicago. In what is now often considered the classic abiogenesis experiment, they exposed a beaker of water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to gentle heating and electrical sparks which emulated lightning. Now, many organic molecules were produced in this experiment, including 20 amino acids. But neither in that experiment, nor in any experiment since, have we observed the spontaneous production of complex proteins, nor DNA, nor indeed something crawling out of the test tube.
Language is recognizable, even if you can't read it. Take Morse code. It has 3 basic parts: dots, dashes, and spaces. These 3 simple parts are combined to represent letters. There are 26 letters in the English language, which are combined to form over 400,000 words. Those words can, of course, be combined into an infinite number of sequences or sentences. There is evidence that DNA represents a language. 4 basic units, called nucleotides, combine into a code for 20 amino acids. From those few amino acids, the body forms more than 100,000 proteins. Even if you can't read DNA, it still has all the hallmarks of language, a language that biologists are just now beginning to crack. Every tiny cell in our body is packed with 3 feet of DNA, 3 billion nucleotides. The similarity between DNA and human language is uncanny. In addition to codes, both use similar techniques to pack, access, rearrange, copy, and translate information. DNA seems to represent a language, the language of life. An unseen author, the creator of heaven and earth, has left a testimony of his existence in the DNA of every living thing.
For those who believe in evolution, they believe that matter gave rise to life. You've got to understand, matter had to give rise to zillions and zillions and zillions and zillions of bits of information. And over millions of years, information keeps coming from matter, new information to form all the different kinds of animals and plants, zillions of bits of information. You know what's interesting? We've never seen matter produce 1 bit of brand new information that never previously existed, not even 1 bit.
When one looks at a typical textbook, one will see some prehistoric pond and molecules, and those molecules coming together and forming a cell, and those cells coming together and some slithering creature coming out of this pond. That is fallacious. There is no truth in that.
This is a cell. What is the origin of life? How do you get a cell like this? What is the origin of something like this? This is an amazing machine. A cell is an amazing machine. It's not just a blob of protoplasm. Every day it gets harder to have the origin of life, to come up with a scenario, because the origin of life becomes more and more complex every day. A cell is a factory. It has the lipid bilayer, which is extremely selective to let certain things in and not other things. It has all of this substructure in here, these little areas where energy is made in here. It has these microtubules which can form so you can move matter from point A to point B. If you go to a factory, what you see is you see these overhead hanging machines that are moving materials from point A to point B. In these systems, and the way they do this is they build these racks, but same thing happens in a cell. You get these microtubules to move material from point A to point B, and then as soon as the material is done moving, the microtubule breaks down and then assembles some other place. You say, well, why doesn't it leave it there? Because then the cell would become too rigid. So it just rebuilds it. It's just amazing factory what's happening in a cell. This is what we have to make. If we want to have origin of life, you got to start here. You don't start here. You start with a single cell. Just build a single cell. That's what we have to do in origin of life. Nobody has ever done this. If you've been taught that simple forms of life have been made, that is a lie that you are believing. Somebody told you a lie. That has never been done. Organisms care about life. Molecules don't care. Chemistry, on the contrary, is utterly indifferent to life. Without a biologically derived entity acting upon them, molecules have never been shown to evolve toward life. Never. Molecules don't care about life. They don't know anything about moving toward life. They have no brain. Organisms want to move toward life and keep life going. Molecules don't care about life. Nobody has ever seen molecules assemble toward life. Never. It doesn't happen without a biological entity working on them. I asked all my colleagues, can you show me an example of this? Of molecules moving toward order, moving toward an ordered system where you have a non-regular assembly. Regular assembly is like A, or AB. That you can get pure thermodynamic assembly. But non-ordered assembly is a non-regular pattern. That's what you have in DNA. We know from computer science you have to have non-regular patterns in order to have complexity for living systems. And I asked my colleagues, do you have any example of molecules without a biological entity acting upon them, moving to give an ordered assembly that is a non-regular pattern? And they sent me papers where chemists have taken molecules and assembled them in that way. I said, non-biological entity. You can't have a human doing this. Molecules don't move toward life. Well, even if you want to have molecules move toward life and you have human beings working upon them, can the human beings do it? And the answer is no. So almost every chemical synthesis experiment in origin of life research can be summed up by a protocol analogous to this. They purchase chemicals generally in high purity from a chemical company. All right, so that's what they do. They first purchase the chemicals. They mix those chemicals together in water in high concentrations in a specific order under some set of carefully devised conditions in a modern lab. Then they can obtain a mixture of compounds that have a resemblance to one or more of the basic 4 classes of chemicals needed for life. So what you need for life is you need carbohydrates, nucleic acids, amino acids, and lipids. That's what we know. All life we know composes those 4 building blocks. So they try to make those 4 building blocks. Then they publish a paper making bold assertions about origin of life from these functionless crude mixtures of stereochemically scrambled intermediates, much like Miller did in 1952. Nothing has changed in 66 years. Nothing. Nothing's changed. Exactly where we were in 1952 is exactly where we have remained. Think about what's been done in science in the past 60 years. Nothing has changed in origin of life studies in 66 years. That's important to realize. Then you engage with the ever gullible press to dial up the knob of unjustified extrapolations. Watch the mesmerized layperson exclaim, "You see, scientists understand how life formed." Then you encourage a generation of science textbook writers to make colorful, deceptive cartoons of raw chemicals assembling from cells which then emerge as slithering creatures from a prehistoric pond. That is exactly what is done every one of their experiments.
So what do I say when someone asks me, do you believe there is life elsewhere in the universe? Carl Sagan once famously wrote that faith is belief in the absence of evidence. And honestly, any scientist who says there has to be life out there is putting forward a position of faith, not one supported by observational evidence and statistical reasoning.
So where are we putting our faith, ultimately? When it comes to belief, here are our choices. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, and he made us in his own image. Or, in the beginning, nothing farted out the heavens and the earth that we got here from goo to you by way of the zoo. Or, nothing farted out the heavens and the earth, and E.T. seeded the goo to make you. Basically, these are our choices, guys. When you proceed from a false premise, your conclusions are going to be sheer madness. This is why we have so many crisis scenarios going on in so-called modern science. And it brings me to my last slide here. Which one is it then? We have all our government-funded textbooks telling us we live on an oblate spheroid. We have this guy saying, no, it's a pear shape. You have NASA and other government organizations like NASA showing us perfectly spherical worlds. And then you have the Bible saying, nope, you live in a snow globe. So which one is it? I say, look, as for me and my house, let God be true and every man a liar. You can laugh at me, you can mock me for saying that, but if you believe you're an evolved ape that got here from goo to you by way of the zoo out of a rock that was spit out of an exploding dot, you don't have the intellectual high ground in this discussion. Sorry to break it to you. And when it comes to evidence, you know, my whole life experience points to the truth of the scriptures. I've had no reason to doubt it. And then when you start seeing other evidences like this, it just confirms all the more that I'm going to trust it for cosmology as well. Thank you.